The screen in front of me flickered and I froze. Camera 4, my usually quiet corner of the warehouse, was moving. Not just panning, something was standing there, perfectly still, but watching. My pulse slammed against my ribs like a jackhammer. Rule 1, never turn your back on a moving shadow. My hand trembled as it hovered over the mouse, cursor poised to switch cameras, but I knew the rule. I couldn't look away. The figure's outline was wrong, limbs elongated, posture unnatural. My brain screamed at me to flip to another feed, but the instructions burned into my memory. Rule 2, do not react to its presence with fear. Fear feeds it. I swallowed a dry, ragged breath. My fingers shook. Then I remembered the paper taped under the monitor. 8 rules, 7 legible, 1 smudged beyond recognition. I could barely make sense of the last few lines, but the first half still mattered. The thing moved a hair's breadth, just enough to remind me it was alive or something like it. A whisper crackled through the static speakers, though no one was on the walkie. You shouldn't be here. The voice was formal, deliberate, but wrong, like a child had been taught etiquette for 100 years. My stomach dropped. Rule 3, never speak unless spoken to. Replying binds you. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself silent. A sudden flicker of lights overhead threw harsh shadows across the empty shelves. Metal crates rattled as if someone or something was brushing past them. I cursed under my breath. Rule 4, move only when instructed by the rules. But my instinct screamed to get up, to flee, to smash the cameras. The instructions didn't say how to survive if it was already in your room. A low, wet scraping sound began behind me, slowly, carefully. My head turned a fraction to the corner of the control room. Nothing, just the dull hum of the monitors. My breath fogged in the freezing air. Rule 5, never let it know you see it fully. My eyes snapped back to camera 4. The figure's head tilted. Perfectly, impossibly, in sync with mine. I yanked the emergency rules sheet from the monitor and scanned the list. Frantic, never turn your back on a moving shadow. Do not react to its presence with fear. Never speak unless spoken to. Move only when instructed by the rules. Never let it know you see it fully. Smudged, unreadable. Keep your eyes on the time. It is your only ally. Escape only at the hour marked in red. The red hour wasn't for another 30 minutes. But 30 minutes in here might as well be eternity. And then the shadow moved closer, dragging something behind it. Something that shouldn't exist. I pressed my palms against the desk, feeling the cold metal bite into my skin. My mind screamed. One wrong move, one broken rule, and I'd know exactly why the instructions existed. My decision came in a heartbeat. I had to stay, keep watching. But the thing in camera 4 wasn't just watching. It was aware I was watching back. And in that moment, I realized survival wasn't about following rules. It was about understanding them, fast, or dying trying. The screen swirled in my vision, a dizzying mosaic of empty aisles, flickering lights, and shadows that moved where they shouldn't. I forced myself to take a slow, steadying breath. Why am I here? The thought flared briefly short. Painful memory of desperate bills, of a family depending on me, of promises I couldn't keep. One wrong step in this place and they'd be the last faces I ever saw. Less than 100 words, and it reminded me why I'd agreed to monitor these cameras. Desperation had led me here, and now it could kill me. A chime rang softly from camera 4, barely audible over the hum of the monitors. The shadow had shifted again, its limbs stretched at impossible angles, brushing along crates without touching the floor. Then a whisper, childlike, almost apologetic, but wrong. You should not have seen! The word sent a chill down my spine. My fingers froze on the mouse. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed along the edges of the screens. I shivered. Something was brushing against the back of my neck. No air movement, no one there, but I felt it. A wet chemical smell filled my nostrils, metallic and rotting. My eyes flicked to the time, 4:15 a.m. Only 15 minutes since the red hour would matter, but in this place, time was already broken. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes collapsed into nothing. I glanced at the instructions again, tracing the smudged Rule 6 with trembling fingertips. The edges were faintly sticky, like the paper had absorbed something unspeakable. I couldn't read it. I tried to ignore it, focused instead on the other rules. Rule 5, never let it know you see it fully. I hadn't looked away since the first second. Was that why it was moving closer? The whisper came again, clearer this time, as if someone or something was just behind the glass. The rules are lies. My stomach turned. I wanted to run, to scream, to break every rule in one defiant movement. But I remembered Rule 2, do not react to its presence with fear. Fear feeds it. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. And then it happened. A flicker in camera 4, its head jerked unnaturally, snapping toward the monitor where I sat. My hand, almost of its own accord, pressed the switch camera button. Instantly, all 8 screens went black. The hum died. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I had broken a rule. I didn't even know which one, but I knew the air itself had turned against me. Something moved behind me, just beyond the corner of my eye, too fast, too wrong to be human. My pulse raced. My body screamed to flee, but the rules, those 7 and the smudged 1, pinned me in place. And in that instant, I understood breaking even one rule had consequences I wasn't ready for. The entity wasn't just aware of me, it was testing me, waiting, and I had just failed its first test. The silence was worse than any sound. My ears rang, blood hammering in my temples. The screens flickered back to life, but camera 4, it wasn't showing the warehouse. Not anymore. The aisle stretched into impossibility, shelves bending in angles my eyes refused to accept. I pressed forward on the controls, trying to pan the camera, but the cursor refused my command. The shadow was gone from view, yet I knew it was there, watching, waiting. A scraping noise echoed through the room, soft at first, then louder, insistent. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized it came from the far corner, the supply closet I'd never entered. The air smelled worse now, rotting metal and wet concrete. My skin crawled, goose flesh prickling along my arms. The rules flashed in my mind. Breaking one had consequences. Rule 6, smudged, unreadable, was likely why. I had no idea what I had unleashed. Then the first signs appeared. A crate at the edge of the warehouse slid just slightly, as if moved by invisible fingers. A low, guttural moan rose from behind the shelves. I caught glimpses, just glimpses of pale, elongated figures pressed against walls, frozen mid-motion. I could make out faint faces twisted in silent terror, eyes locked on empty space. People. Whoever had failed before me. The time on the monitor flickered violently, 4:17 a.m. 5 minutes since the red hour. Except here, it didn't matter. The numbers warped, reversed, then froze. Seconds stretched into eternities. My wristwatch read differently than the monitors. Reality itself felt frayed. Then someone, or something, spoke. "You don't belong here." The voice was female this time, precise, almost gentle, but it carried knowledge far beyond human. My stomach knotted. I turned toward the sound, but nothing stood there. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I shook, trying to focus. Rule 5, never let it know you see it fully. My vision darted to the screens. One of them caught a reflection behind me, a figure, featureless, just a dark mass with twitching limbs. It mimicked my posture, mirrored my breathing. My throat tightened. I knew what I'd done. I had broken the rules by instinct, by fear, by reaction. And now, the warehouse wasn't just a building. It was a cage, a corridor stretched behind me, twisting impossibly, filled with shadows that shouldn't exist. The walls pulsed as if alive, breathing. I realized I wasn't alone. Something ancient had been waiting for me to fail, to slip, to break. And with my first misstep, it had begun its work. Time didn't move, reality didn't obey, and I was already behind schedule. The lights flickered violently, strobing across the control room like some sick rhythm. My chest tightened as the shadow in camera 4 reappeared, but it wasn't alone. The figures behind it, pale, contorted, half-human, slithered along the shelves, moving without sound, impossible joints bending in ways I didn't think could exist. My fingers shook over the keyboard, desperate to switch cameras, to run, to do anything. A soft, wet scraping sound came from the door behind me. I froze. The air smelled wrong, like burned sugar and wet iron. My stomach roiled. I risked a glance at the reflection in the monitor. One of the figures was behind me now, just a pulse of darkness in the glass. I tried to look away. Then I heard it, a voice from the darkness, low and deliberate. "You've broken the line." I swallowed hard. It wasn't the shadow speaking this time. The voice belonged to someone alive, or at least human once. From the corner of the room, a man emerged, mid-30s, ragged, eyes too wide like he had seen too much. "They test you," he whispered. "Every move, every thought, they're counting. In the time," he pointed at the monitors. "Time doesn't exist here the way you think it does. Watch the shadows. Watch the loops." I stared at him, frozen. Who are you?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. You need to follow the rules, all of them. But know this, breaking even one unravels everything." His gaze flicked toward camera 4, and my stomach dropped. The shadow had multiplied, or maybe it had always been there, hidden in angles, waiting. I tried to process, but the warehouse itself seemed to twist. Corridors lengthened impossibly. Crates that had been stacked neatly now leaned at unnatural angles. Whispers filled the room, overlapping, repeating, some too fast for comprehension. Don't you belong here, don't belong. I noticed something horrifying, traces of past watchers, the ones who had failed before me. Items strewn across aisles, papers, pens, half-drained coffee cups, but each had rotted, twisted faces pressed into the surfaces as if screaming silently, evidence that failure had consequences beyond death. The man's voice cut through my spiraling panic. Rule 6, the smudged one? Most people never see it, but you might survive long enough to find out. He stepped back into the shadows, vanishing, leaving only the oppressive air and the flickering monitors. The reflection in camera 4 shifted, the shadow's head tilted again, perfectly in sync with mine. A whisper hissed from the static, unmistakable. You broke 1. My body tensed. Every instinct screamed to move, to obey, to run, to look away, but the rules, my only lifeline, pressed heavily in my mind. I realized that in this place consequences weren't delayed, they were immediate, merciless, in bending reality itself. Time was already collapsing, and I had no idea how far behind or ahead I really was. The monitors flared, then went black. My stomach lurched as I fumbled to reboot them, but the lights themselves pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The shadow in camera 4 wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving, stretching through aisles that hadn't existed a minute ago. I remembered the rules, 8 of them, but the 6th remained smudged, a ghost of instruction I couldn't read. A metallic clang echoed from the far end of the warehouse. I froze. Rule 4, move only when instructed by the rules, but the shadow was coming closer. My body wanted to flee, but my mind screamed that moving could be worse. My hands hovered over the keyboard like claws. I knew breaking 1 rule might trigger a cascade. Breaking 2 could destroy me entirely. The figure, no figures, shifted in the monitors. Pale faces pressed against crates, eyes hollow and pleading. I understood suddenly. These were the previous watchers, the ones who'd failed, their forms twisted, caught between dimensions, trapped. Time didn't flow for them anymore. They were suspended in loops of fear. A voice crackled in the room, formal, deliberate, yet impossibly soft. Choice. Always choice. It came from nowhere, everywhere. I realized the entity itself spoke through the warehouse, through the monitors. Every movement, every decision fed it. My pulse spiked. The temperature dropped. Frost spread across the desk. My fingers tingled with cold. Then I saw it. A new shadow, larger, more malformed than the last. It wasn't just an entity. It was the culmination of every watcher's fear, every broken rule, every failure stacked into something alive. I understood. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were tests. And the 6th rule, the smudged one, held the key to survival, or maybe escape. I glanced at the emergency paper. The edges glimmered faintly, sticky with something I didn't want to touch. My heart thumped. Could I risk trying to decipher it, or would any attempt bring immediate death? Another flicker. The shadow in camera 4 reached toward the camera lens as if to break it, and for the first time I realized it knew I was thinking about the rule. I pressed my hand against the desk, trying to steady my mind. 1 rule could save me, or doom me. The choice wasn't just survival anymore. It was moral, tactical, cosmic, and the red hour was creeping closer, though time was no longer linear. I could feel it folding around me, stretching impossibly, pulling me toward a moment I couldn't predict. I made a decision. I would try to uncover the smudged rule, whatever the cost, and in that instant the shadow screamed, not a sound, but a presence that rattled my very bones. The rules were no longer suggestions. They were everything. The warehouse pulsed around me, shelves bending like soft clay. My pulse raced. Each monitor now displayed impossible angles, crates stacked impossibly high, aisles folding back on themselves, shadows moving against physics. I could feel reality straining, as if the very walls were breathing. Rule 1, never turn your back on a moving shadow. My instinct screamed to flee, but every part of me knew fleeing would break. Rule 4, move only when instructed by the rules. I glanced at the emergency sheet. Rule 6, the smudged one, stared back, a blank space filled with dread. I tried tracing it again, pressing my fingertips against the paper. The sticky texture made my skin crawl like it had absorbed decades of fear. My mind raced. What if deciphering it triggered a consequence worse than death? The shadow in camera 4 convulsed, stretching impossibly, then vanished. A second, smaller shadow appeared on another monitor, mirroring my movements. I realized with horror breaking 1 rule had already made it multiply. Multiple rules were being tested at once. I had no choice. 1 misstep now could unravel everything. Suddenly a guttural voice whispered directly into my ear. The rules are not protection. They are the gate. My heart skipped a beat. I spun, but no one was there. Only the warped aisles on the monitors and the figures pressed against the shelves, frozen in torment. Some stared directly at me, eyes hollow, begging. trapped souls, victims. Something had happened to them and I could see glimpses of their suffering. I realized the truth. This warehouse didn't just exist in our reality. It hung between dimensions, a space designed to bend, stretch, and consume. The rules were instructions for navigating it. The smudged sixth rule? That was the key to survival. Hidden, almost impossible, yet critical. A sudden vibration ran through the floorboards. My stomach dropped. I could hear footsteps, or echoes of them. I spun to the door, but it wasn't there. Just more warped hallways, impossible angles folding over themselves. The entity had fractured the space itself, testing every rule simultaneously. I had to make a choice. I could risk breaking a rule to avoid breaking a worse one. But every choice carried immediate consequences, and the rules were designed to trap me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, mind racing, pulse thundering. One wrong move and I would join the twisted forms trapped forever in the folds of this place. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and whispered to myself, I will find the sixth rule. I will survive. And then the shadows shifted again, closer, larger, and impossibly aware that I was looking for the truth. Time didn't move forward. It didn't move backward. It only watched. The monitor screamed light into my eyes, flickering with impossible angles. Camera 4! My nemesis! Showed a new sight. A figure crouched among the crates, familiar yet wrong. The face was distorted, eyes hollow, lips stretched into a silent scream. And then I recognized it. The one whose belongings I had seen in the warped aisles. They weren't gone, not really. They were trapped here, twisted, a warning etched in flesh and shadow. A whisper crawled along the walls, formal, deliberate, impossible to localize. They all fail. You will too, unless... The voice fractured mid-sentence, and the room pulsed with cold air, icy fingers brushing my neck. I shivered violently. Time wasn't moving forward. It looped, jerking, repeating moments over and over. My watch read 4:23 a.m. The monitors blinked. 4:21, 4:23, 4:19. Each second was a trap. I forced myself to focus. Rule 6, the smudged one, was the keystone. I realized it wasn't just hidden. It wasn't meant to be read until the right conditions were met. And those conditions? Fear, desperation, a broken rule. I had all three. The shadow emerged again, larger, darker, now fracturing into shapes I couldn't comprehend. It spoke, voice warped. They feed on fear, on the rules, on broken minds. The air around me thickened, bending sound, muting my heartbeat, trapping me in an oppressive silence. The warehouse wasn't a place. It was a test, a trap designed to consume anyone who failed to understand the rules. I realized then the rules weren't protection. They were bait, a lure. The entity didn't need to attack. It only needed me to exist here, to falter, to feel. Every hesitation, every glance away, every flicker of fear fueled it, and the previous watcher had failed in exactly this way. The twisted figure on camera 4 reached a clawed hand toward the lens, and for a moment I thought it was me, or what I could become. Then a new whisper, childlike, too formal, slithered around my mind. Do not trust time. Do not trust yourself. The rules are the choice, not the salvation. I took a shaky breath. My eyes darted to the monitors, to the warped aisles, to the figures pressing against the walls, to the impossible geometry of the space. And I understood this wasn't just a warehouse. It was a dimension built to bend rules, to test obedience, to feed on failure. The previous watcher's empty, twisted stare burned into me. Their face seemed to plead, learn the rules, survive, don't become me. I whispered, voice trembling, I see you. I won't fail like you. The shadows laughed, or maybe it was the entity itself, the sound crawling along the walls like rot. Time wavered. The red hour approached, and I realized I had only begun the test. The warehouse had become a living nightmare, shelves twisted into impossible angles, aisles folded over themselves, and shadows moved with intent. Camera 4 glowed like a portal, each flicker revealing something new, faces pressed against crates, twisted, silent screams frozen in time. The previous watcher's eyes followed me, accusing, pleading, trapped forever between dimensions. A voice slithered along the walls, formal but childlike. Rules are the bait, fear is the feast, desperation the dessert. I shivered. The air smelled of wet metal and decaying sugar. Every breath burned my lungs. The temperature swung wildly from bone-chilling cold to suffocating heat in seconds. My skin crawled with the sensation of invisible hands brushing against me. I realized with horror that the rules were being tested simultaneously. I couldn't follow them all. To obey one meant breaking another. My heart hammered as I considered every possible action. One wrong move and I would join the twisted forms trapped in the aisles, evidence of failed watchers. Then the entity revealed itself, not in form, but in presence. The shadows coalesced into something vast, something ancient. Its hunger radiated through the walls, through the air, through my very mind. It wasn't just feeding on fear. It thrived on broken rules, on hesitation, on the exact desperation that had brought me here. I could feel it, a primordial intelligence bending the space around me, bending me. The red hour on the monitors flickered closer, though time had no meaning here. My pulse matched the rhythm of the entity, each beat a tether, each choice a potential snare. I could hear whispers overlapping, repeating fragments of past failures, faint cries of torment. Reality was tearing. Corridors stretched into infinity, then looped back impossibly, a Möbius strip of terror. I pressed my palms against the desk, trying to anchor myself. My eyes darted to the smudged Rule 6. I had felt it before, its presence magnetic, as if the entity itself feared it. Whatever it said could save me or doom me instantly. I realized that discovering it wasn't optional. It was survival, but approaching it risked everything. A flicker in Camera 4 revealed movement in the farthest, darkest aisle. A pale, twisted hand waved at me. The previous watcher? Or the entity mocking me? I didn't know anymore. The rules were no longer guidance. They were traps, tests, and the path forward twisted impossibly. I had to act. Fear fed it, hesitation fed it. Only understanding, only knowledge could give me leverage. And the smudged rule, whatever it said, was the final key. Time didn't move. The red hour approached, the shadows waited, and the entity hungered. The monitors flashed violently, throwing the control room into an oppressive strobe of shadows. Every aisle, every corner, every warped surface of the warehouse twisted into impossible angles. The shadows moved like predators, reaching for me across space that shouldn't exist. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the hum of the monitors. I had broken multiple rules now, moving when I shouldn't, reacting to fear, letting my eyes linger too long. Each violation had consequences that manifested instantly, shadows brushing just beyond my reach, distorted whispers drilling into my skull, and the air itself bending, thick and suffocating. The red hour! My supposed chance of escape was approaching, though time no longer behaved linearly. My watch flickered. 4:29, 4:27, 4:31. I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything. Then the entity revealed itself. Not a shadow this time, not a reflection, not a voice, but a presence so vast, so ancient, it felt like reality itself recoiled from it. The air quivered. The walls pulsed. The whispers coalesced into a single, deep resonance that shook me to my core. You were chosen to feed me or to free yourself. My mind reeled. The smudged Rule 6 floated at the edge of my awareness. I knew now what it meant, what it had always meant, but only one path allowed me to act without immediate death. Rule 6, you must see the rules completely, but only after breaking one truly, consciously, and face the consequences willingly. I trembled as the shadows lunged from impossible angles. Faces of previous watchers appeared in the warped aisles, twisted and silent, their eyes pleading, warning me. I realized they hadn't failed by dying. They had failed by hesitation. My hand shook as I reached for the smudged rule, forcing myself to confront it. Words appeared in the faintest glow, etched in a pattern I could barely decipher. To survive, you must break what you fear most, but understand why you do it. Fear obeys only knowledge. If I acted with understanding, with deliberate choice, I could manipulate it, use its rules against it, but the cost was immediate. One violation, one misstep, and I would be trapped like the watcher before me. The red hour struck, time fractured violently, shadows lunged. The entity loomed, filling every corner of my vision. I had one decision left. I had to break a rule intentionally, deliberately, understanding fully the consequence, and as I made my choice, the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. The entity waited. The shadows surged from every corner, bending impossibly, their whispers coiling around my skull. My lungs burned, heart pounding against my ribs as if trying to escape my chest. The red hour had struck, yet time wasn't moving linearly. 1 second stretched into eternity, then snapped back into fractured beats. Every violated rule pulsed around me like a live wire. The entity, immense and unseen, fed on the chaos, its presence like a cold hand squeezing reality itself. I forced my trembling hands onto the desk, staring at the smudge rule 6. I finally understood. Survival wasn't about obeying blindly. It was about understanding the nature of the rules, the entity, and myself. It feeds on fear, hesitation, and ignorance. Knowledge was the loophole. The rule had always been, break what you fear most, but with intent and comprehension. I closed my eyes, inhaled the metallic, rotting air, and let the fear roll over me instead of away. Every shadow, every distorted figure, every whisper became a part of the puzzle. I focused on the previous watcher, their pleading eyes embedded in the warped aisles. They hadn't failed by dying. They had failed by panicking. I would not. Then I acted. Slowly, deliberately, I moved toward the keyboard, violating Rule 4, moving without direct instruction, but with full awareness. My fingers pressed a sequence of keys, not to flee, but to engage the warehouse itself, the monitors, the warped space. The entity reacted instantly, a ripple of distortion shaking the walls, the air thick with cold and rot. Shadows lunged, yet I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze steady on camera 4. A scream low, guttural, infinite shook the space. Figures pressed against crates, convulsed, some vanishing, others frozen mid-gesture. I felt the entity recoil, twisting as if it hadn't expected comprehension, understanding, knowledge. I had broken the rules, yes, but I had done so with purpose. Time fractured one last time. Seconds stretched into eternity, then snapped back. The warehouse stabilized slightly. Shadows receded to corners, watching, waiting, but no longer attacking. Camera 4 flickered, and the figure of the previous watcher appeared. For a brief, impossible moment, their eyes met mine. Relief, recognition, a fleeting acknowledgement of my success. Then they dissolved into the air, leaving the warehouse silent but haunted. I stumbled back from the desk, trembling. The red hour had ended, but I was not unscathed. I was alive, yes, but changed. Knowledge had saved me, but survival had come at a cost. Every sense sharpened, every shadow now a potential threat, every corner a reminder that the entity still lingered. I glanced at camera 4 one last time. The shadow wasn't gone, just watching, waiting. The rules still existed, the warehouse still bent space and time, and something ancient still fed in the darkness. I had won. But I had also been marked, and in that flicker of monitors, I realized the truth. I had survived, not because I was clever, but because I had understood fear. It would never forget me.